So, if I remember correctly, the last time we met, we had met Walks Across the Sky, who is the one that uses her magic paintbrush that has all of the colors of the rainbow already in the paintbrush to paint pictures that make their way to the Book of Time. Sometimes the stories that she paints are things that have happened, sometimes they're things that will happen, and sometimes they're things that might happen. And she told Little Man with Hair All Over and Mole Man that she didn't think of the stories herself. She wasn't the one who made them happen. She just put them down on paper. And Little Man with Hair All Over was very interested. He also had met her on the front porch of a little house that was made from the stump of a redwood tree. And Walks Across the Sky told him that nobody lived in the house. And he thought it would be a wonderful place to live. And so he had staked his claim on that house, which is where he now lives, in a stump next to a redwood tree at the bottom of North Mountain. And Walks Across the Sky had told him that if he wanted to know more about how the paintbrush worked and about how she wrote in the Book of Time and how it appeared in Spider-Woman's cave, then she would have to take him on a trip to show him. It would be easier to show him than to tell him. And he agreed. And so they had closed up the house after Little Man with Hair All Over had gotten his water bottle filled and put on his backpack, and Mole Man hopped into the pack so it wouldn't be so hard, and he started to follow Walks Across the Sky. And as he followed Walks Across the Sky, he noticed that as she moved, she seemed to glide across the ground. It was as though she didn't touch the ground at all. The grass was not crumpled under her feet. The trees seemed to get out of the way, and the rocks even seemed to smooth over as she moved, which would have been very different if he had walked alone on the trail. And he asked her how that happened, and she said, "I will show you." Is that where we are now?
Yes.
Okay. And she said, "Do you know that my name is Walks Across the Sky?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "That is because I walk across the sky." And Little Man with Hair All Over thought, "Oh my gosh, you walk across the sky? How can you walk across the sky? I see that you're not making much of an imprint on the ground, so are you gliding?" And she said, "Well, sort of, but I can actually step up off of the ground if I see clouds. And I can step and leap from cloud to cloud through the sky." And Little Man with Hair All Over said, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing. How do you do it?" And she said, "Well, I can't explain exactly how I do it, but I can show you." And so he followed her until they came to the edge of the forest, and it just happened to be a fairly cloudy day. And as they were standing looking at the clouds, Walks Across the Sky said, "Now, if I step out into the clouds, I'll leave you behind, unless you're holding my hand." And he said, "All right, are you sure it'll be safe?" And she said, "I'm sure. Trust me." And she reached out her hand, and he took a hold. And as soon as he held her hand, he felt lighter. He felt like even when he was walking, he was gliding. And then, as they were gliding along, he watched her step up onto the cloud, the closest cloud to the ground. She took a step, and she was on a cloud. And he was standing there right next to her. And he thought, "This is amazing." And then she said, "In order for us to stay on the cloud, we're going to have to keep moving. Because clouds, as you might know, are just water droplets. If I stay for too long, if you stay for too long, then you'll rain down to the ground like a drop of rain." He said, "Oh my gosh, well, we better keep moving." And so she kept walking as she was talking, and he kept walking next to her. And then they were coming to the edge of the cloud. And she said, "Now remember, I have to be on something. I can't just stand in the sky. I walk across the sky, but I need something to stand on." And he looked around, and he saw they were coming to the edge of the cloud, and he said, wait, there's another cloud over there. And she said, excellent. And so she turned, and she leapt across onto the next cloud with him holding tight to her hand. And imagine if you're standing on the edge of a cloud, and all of a sudden you take a big jump, and you're just in the sky, not falling, but hanging in the sky. And then, just as he thought he was about to fall, she stepped onto the next cloud, and he stepped onto it with her. He said, this is amazing. And she said, it is, but sometimes it's not a cloudy day. In fact, sometimes it's nighttime. So I have to walk on something. I can't just walk in the sky. And he said, well, can you walk on a rainbow? She said, of course. And he said, well, can you walk on a star? And she said, yes. Can you walk on a branch? And she said, well, yes, but branches aren't in the sky. They're on trees. And he said, oh, this is amazing. But how does your paintbrush work? And she said, well, be patient. We have to get across the sky first. And so they started to jog along. Now that he knew that he was safe, he just had to hold on. They started to move fast. And she was quite fast, much faster than he thought she would be. As she ran, he could feel the wind in his hair, and he had a lot of hair to be blown in the wind. And he could feel as though, have you ever stuck your head, and you should never do this, but have you ever stuck your head out of the window when you were driving?
No.
Good. Yes. Never do that. It's not safe at all.
I've done it.
Oh, well, it's not safe. Don't do that.
I do it when the car is not moving.
How about when you put your hand out and you can feel the wind and you make like an airplane with your fingers and you do this? Has anybody ever done that? Yeah. So that's kind of what it felt like, except his whole body was doing that through the sky as he ran across the clouds. Yes?
I've done it on the highway.
No, that's dangerous. Don't do that. That's not safe.
I've done it on the highway.
Okay. So, friends, I think we can all agree it's not safe. Please don't do that. And so, as they ran along across the clouds, Little Man with Hair Lover started to see up ahead that the sky was clear. And they were very high in the sky. And he said, walks across the sky, do you see what I see? And she said, well, what do you see? And he said, I think we're running out of clouds. And she was running so fast that she had not been paying attention. She also was kind of excited because she never got to run with somebody across the clouds. And so she had lost her focus because she was so focused on making sure he was safe. And she realized before she almost got to the edge of that cloud that there was nothing else for them to step onto. And just at that moment, Mole Man, who had been sitting in the backpack, which he had opened because he could tell that they were no longer on the ground. Because, you know, when you walk, you can kind of, if you're like standing on somebody's shoulders, you can tell when they're walking, right? Their body moving. But running across the sky, Little Man with Hair All Over seemed to be gliding and not moving his feet at all. And so Mole Man had noticed because it felt like they had stopped moving. And so he had popped his head up out of the backpack and saw that not only were they not on the ground, but they were hundreds of feet up in the clouds. And he was not panicked, but certainly a little nervous. And then he said, as he saw them getting close to the edge of the cloud and hearing that Little Man with Hair All Over and Walks Across the Sky realized that they were running out of clouds, he let out a whistle. And the whistle that he let out sounded just like an eagle. And as they ran out of clouds, a golden eagle that had been soaring nearby flew under, and they jumped onto its back. Walks Across the Sky said, oh my goodness, Mole Man, how did you know? And Mole Man said, well, let's just say I was hoping somebody would be able to help us because I did not want to fall all the way back down to the ground again, even inside of this backpack that is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. The golden eagle that they had landed on the back of flew along and brought them to the top of a very tall prickly pine tree and deposited them in a nest. The nest was 25 feet wide, a huge nest, wide enough for all of them to stand inside of and walk around. And Walks Across the Sky thanked the eagle for helping them. And then the eagle flew away. And Little Man with Hair All Over said, well, wait. Now we're at the top of a nest, and there are no clouds nearby. What are we going to do? He walks across the sky, said, well, remember you said I can walk on branches? We're going to walk down the tree. The Little Man with Hair All Over said, oh, my goodness. And he looked down, and over the edge of that huge 25-foot wide eagle's nest, and he saw that they were hundreds of feet up in the air. Not as high as they had been on top of a cloud, but still, this was the tallest tree he had ever been on. And he was a little nervous. And he said, should I hold your hand? And she said, it's probably best if you do. And he held onto her hand. And then he said, wait a minute, I just remembered. I can show you something now. And he remembered that he had been given a gift by 3 animals, a worm, a bird, and a wasp. And he remembered that he could become any of those animals. And he said, walks across the sky. I can go down by myself, but would you mind carrying my backpack? Because I can't go down with my backpack on. And Mole Man said, oh, yes, please. And so walks across the sky, took the backpack with Mole Man still in it. And Little Man with Hair All Over, who had not yet tried to be one of the 3 animals, decided to be a wasp.
Because it can fly.
Yes.
I think that we're at the wasp, worm, and...
Do you remember that was the first story we told?
No. Yes. No. He helped a bird. He helped a bear. That had a head.
3 animals that were... Oh, maybe not. Maybe it was last year. Did I not tell you this story?
Yes. No.
About 3 animals?
No. You didn't tell us it.
Oh my gosh, all the stories run together. Well, quickly I'll tell you. So sorry. Because I couldn't have told you because he didn't have a house yet. OMG LOL. Once upon a time there was a little man with hair all over. He walked outside even though he didn't have a house to live in. And there were 3 animals sitting on a porch that he didn't own. One was a bird, one was a wasp, and one was a worm. And the 3 animals were fighting over a bone. And Little Man with Hair All Over said, friends, why are you fighting? And they said, I want this bone. The wasp said, I want the bone. The bird said, I want the bone. And the worm said, I want the bone too. And Little Man with Hair All Over said, well, can't you share the bone? And the bird said, well, I can't share the bone. I want to use the bone for part of my nest. I want to build it into my nest. And the worm said, well, I can't share the bone either because I want to dig through the marrow of the bone because it's so sweet. And then the wasp said, well, I can't share the bone either because I want to drink the sweet blood. And Little Man with Hair All Over said, wait, you all want the bone for different things. Why don't you just take turns? And the worm said, what do you mean? And Little Man with Hair All Over said, well, if the worm wants to dig through the marrow, he can dig through the marrow. And if the wasp then wants to drink the blood, then he can drink the blood. And then when all of the blood and all of the marrow have been taken care of, the bird can take the bone home and make it part of his nest. And then all 3 of you can have a part that you want. Not the whole thing, but the thing that you really want. And they all thought, oh, this is an amazing thing. Thank you so much for solving our problem. And so the worm did, in fact, dig through the marrow. And then the wasp drank the blood that was left over. And when all of the marrow and all of the wasp blood had been taken out of the bone, all that was left was the bone, and the bird was able to take it to make it part of his nest. And the 3 animals, who were actually friends, they were just having a disagreement, said, Little Man with Hair All Over, you may have the gift of being able to be any of us at any time. All you have to do is ask. Yes?
At the beginning of the story, Little Man with Hair All Over didn't have a name. So how did the animals know his name?
I know. This is the problem with telling the same story for 25 years. I didn't know what you didn't know until you didn't know it, and now I know it, and now all of us know it. But let's just imagine that they didn't call him Little Man with Hair All Over. They just saw that he was a little man with hair all over. How about that? Okay? So, he decided to become a wasp because he could. And he became a wasp. He turned into a wasp, and it was the first time he had been a wasp. And it was a strange thing because even though he's a little man with hair all over, only about this tall, now he was only about this tall. And so everything in the world looked much bigger. Walks across the sky was ginormous. And Mole Man, who had a big star-nosed mole, looked like a monster. And he was very, very small, but he could fly. And so he started to fly down and walks across the sky, climbed down the branches and didn't climb with her hands, but just her feet. She hopped from one branch to another branch to another branch as though she was walking across the sky. And when she went from branch to branch, none of the leaves shook. All the branches seemed to kind of swing her way until finally they were both down at the ground. And Little Man with Hair All Over turned back into Little Man with Hair All Over and said, that was very strange. You looked huge. And why am I wanting to go and burrow into a little tree branch right now? It's a strange feeling. And then walks across the sky, and Little Man with Hair All Over, who were standing at the bottom of a prickly pine tree, the tallest tree that Little Man with Hair All Over had ever seen, noticed that not only at the bottom of the tree were they on the ground again, but right underneath that tree there was a little stone that was completely round, as round as it could be. It didn't look natural. You know how a rock or a stone hardly ever is completely round. And this looked as though someone had made it that way. And then, when Little Man with Hair All Over looked more closely, he thought he saw a carving in the rock. And walks across the sky and said, this is what I wanted you to see. Look closely. And he looked closely at the carving. And the carving seemed to be telling a story, kind of like if you saw a painting on a wall. And the story was of Walks Across the Sky, and Little Man with Hair All Over, and Mole Man sitting next to a prickly pine tree. And that had been carved into a perfectly round stone at the bottom of that tree. Little Man with Hair All Over was amazed. How did this happen? Who made this? And Walks Across the Sky said, I have a paintbrush, and I can paint things that sometimes will happen, and sometimes might happen, and sometimes have happened, and they show up in the book of time. But there are others that are like me, that do things differently, but also tell stories. And one person is Sarah Weaver. She lives in a little town nearby, and she weaves all of the stories of her town into a tapestry, into a big carpet. And some people will carve things out of wood. And here we can see somebody carved an etching into a stone. And they all tell stories. And Little Man with Hair All Over said, well, wait, do these stories show up in the book of time as well? And she said, yes. I didn't make this story. Someone else did. But it's still showing up in the book of time. And Little Man with Hair All Over was amazed. And he said, well, do you know who made this one? And she said, I think so. Let's take a little hike. If we go down a trail nearby, I think he must live nearby, because trying to carry a heavy stone would be very difficult. But let's see if he's there, the sculptor. And so they started to walk down the trail away from the stone. And as they did, Walks Across the Sky, who was back on the ground again, didn't make any imprints on the ground. And Little Man with Hair All Over, who was back on the ground again, made his footprints everywhere he went, because he was Little Man with Hair All Over.
How much did he weigh?
He weighs about 28 pounds.
That's pretty light.
Yeah, pretty light, but still heavy enough to make the grass crumple under his feet. And so as they walked down the trail, the cool woods all around them, the trail started to widen up into a clearing that somebody had made. The trees had been cut down. And there was a little stone hut in the middle of this clearing in the woods. And all around it, there were perfectly round stones. Some of them had carvings on them. Some of them were completely blank. But all of them were the same size and the same shape. And Walks Across the Sky and Little Man with Hair All Over walked over to the closest one. And they could see that it had an etching, a carving of Spider-Woman in her cave on North Mountain. And then they walked to another one. And they could see that there was an eagle, half man and half eagle. And then they walked to another one, and they could see that there was a library that had books and paintings all going up the walls of the library. And Little Man with Hair All Over said, this must be where the carver, where the stonecutter, the sculptor lives. The stonecutter lives. And then the door of the stone hut flew open, and out came a little man with hair all over.
What?
I know. And little man with hair all over said, "Hello, who are you?" And the little man with hair all over who came out of the hut said, "My name is Bob."
Bob.
Yes.
Bob the Carver. Bob.
Welcome to my home. I've been waiting for you. And little man with hair all over said, "Well, Bob," and that's a very nice name, "how did you know we were coming?" And he said, "Well, I woke up this morning and I came out to do my morning carving, and I carved a stone that was of you and walks across the sky. Hello, walks across the sky." And walks across the sky said, "Hello, Bob. I haven't seen you in a long time." And he said, come in. It's time for lunch. I'm so glad you guys stopped by. Come in. We have so much to talk about." So they went into the stone carver's house, and Bob gave them a meal of Rocky Road ice cream, because it was a rock. And it was delicious, of course. It was a hot day anyway. Yes?
Is man of hair all over a different species of human?
Let's find out. And Bob said, "Little man with hair all over, I'm so glad you stopped by. I'm sure you have lots of questions." And little man with hair all over said, "I do. I have never seen anyone who looked like me, and you look a lot like me. And who gave you the name Bob? Because Mole Man just called me little man with hair all over a couple days ago. And I wonder if I have a different name." And Bob said, "Well, I don't know the answer to that. But I do know the answer to you never seeing anyone who looked like me. And I'll tell you the rest of that story another time."
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, friends.